Welcome to All Good Points. We're back.
Season 2.
Season 2. This is nice.
Isn't it lovely?
Do we look professional? With
It's
this
very-
it's
It's
real
not
brick behind us.
real brick.
But nice to see you both. Thanks for coming on. So loads has happened since we last did this.
Well, it's been an age.
It's been quite
6
an age.
months. Yeah.
Is that how long it's been?
Wow.
I think
Oh,
about
so-
6 months.
Okay.
Maybe 7.
Well, we're back in it. We're going all back into All Good Points.
It seems to just move with the times of corona restrictions. As soon as
Yeah.
the corona restrictions ratchet up, then all good
Back
points comes on.
to back to cannabis
Yeah,
stories.
and then when we're free again, we'll have better things to do. And it'll die again.
It's not going to die. It's not going to die. We're booking this
No, that's
studio,
the
mate. The
season
studio's
finale.
booked, right? We've got to fill this studio. So yeah, thanks for joining us. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to break down all the main news that's happening in the world of cannabis and wider drug reform, areas and stories that we think have been interesting over the past few weeks. Big one to kick things off that's certainly caught a lot of people's attention, not just here in the UK, but across the world, has been what's been going on in Germany. Germany announcing that they're going to have a recreational adult use cannabis market. George, you've had your eye across this for some time. So what do you kind of make of that announcement? What are your thoughts on that, the potential for it?
I'm obviously quite excited. Of all of the countries in Europe that could make that move, it's probably the most influential one that could do so. So it should have a huge impact on reform more broadly, but it's great news for Germans, obviously. Well, for those
For
of
the
them on our
world.
side of the debate. But more broadly, it was a kind of expected, but not expected, in that we were expecting, if this coalition, the traffic light coalition, as they're called, won, that reform would take place. But it looked pretty unlikely that we were going to have this novel government of 3 different parties. It was quite an unlikely thing to come off. So thank God it did. And thank God they have stuck to their guns in proposing the legalization of cannabis. But as everyone's at pains to say, it's a long old road from an announcement to a functioning market. Still got to design a bill, go through multiple different drafts, then get tabled and voted on in Parliament before it then would become law. And then even then there's going to have to be a whole licensing process, implementation process. So it's likely to take years before there are actual dispensaries on the high street in Germany. But nevertheless, it is very likely to happen.
Is there any chat around what the model might look like at this stage?
People are saying that it's going to be based around the Greens' previously tabled proposal for the legalization of cannabis.
And the guy that's replaced Merkel, was he a Green
No.
MP? No. He's just like a liberal, like one of their like classic liberal.
Yeah, it's a coalition of strange bedfellows.
Is that what they're called?
Strange
Coalition of
bedfellows.
strange bedfellows.
Because it's the Greens and then the kind of socially liberal, fiscally conservative right, and then the liberals. And so all of them have probably very different ways that they would go about this if they were in charge on their own. And I think this idea that it's just going to be based on what the Greens want is maybe slightly naive, because it will have to be something that all of them can get behind, and they're coming at it from very different angles. So I don't think that Green proposal is necessarily a good blueprint from which we can understand what the system's going to look like. I think we're going to have to wait and see, and it's going to be a political process, obviously, and we're going to have to see what happens. I don't think it'll just look like what the Greens want it to look like. I think it's likely to be quite commercial in the end.
Yeah. Mm.
Well, hopefully, sensible would be an evidence-based, sensible model would be good. We talked a bit about this, haven't we, at Volteface, around how Germany going legal is great for the UK.
Yeah.
And about the optics of what that will do for politicians here. Because it's been challenging, hasn't it? Like lobbying MPs on recreational adult use reform.
I think because it's a little bit closer to home. Like the North American market seems just a little bit too distant and not really applicable to the UK, or at least that's what UK politicians are saying at the moment. So I think, Germany going legal, obviously we'll be chatting about like Switzerland and Luxembourg and Malta as well. So there's that kind of European push, which could help.
Yeah. There's always been the challenge of the North American reforms, isn't it? It's people are like, well, I mean, that's North America. It's different over here. It's different. I don't know.
Yeah.
Different landscape. Whereas, Germany's it's what? Yeah,
no longer. We're going
to we've got
be able to point.
No more excuses.
No more excuses. Let's go for it. Do you think it'll be like pro-tourist, the model?
It'll have to be. There's no way that Germany's going to be able to exclude tourists. It's too large of a country. I just can't see that happening. So we're going to talk about Luxembourg and elsewhere, but I think they were constrained in terms of what they could do because of issues around perception that they'd be flooded with people from other countries who would then smuggle the cannabis back. And I think that's a big issue if you're Luxembourg or
because it's such a tiny country or city-state that's surrounded by other countries.
So they would become like a narco state if they were trying to. If suddenly Germans were all flooding in every day to buy cannabis, they would have a huge amount of cannabis retail for a very small country. Whereas with Germany, no, if they're legalizing it for the 100 million Germans, I'm sure they're going to find room to legalize it for everyone else.
You hope so. What's the Katya, you've spent a lot of time in that part of the world, maybe not Germany itself, but in that general region area. What do you think? I've always thought of Germans as being pretty conservative when it comes to things like this.
I think,
or do you think they could end up with a market and a model which is quite pushes the fun element? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think Germany's quite a big country as well, so the area is different. Kind of, I guess. Public support for cannabis. Obviously, places like Berlin are going to be quite pro and very liberal, but other areas, I'm not sure where Munich stands on it, and areas in Bavaria might be a little bit more conservative. So I think with any country that's of a significant size, you're going to get disparities in how people perceive it. The Czech Republic kind of stands somewhere in between. It's got quite high cannabis use rates, but generally the country still looks down upon cannabis. I think it's obviously there's significant amount of people that use cannabis, but still quite a young population. Yeah. So generally the sentiment's still quite stigmatized. Yeah. So that might be how it's kind of seen.
It could be interesting for Czech Republic because borders Germany, right? See, my European geography knowledge is really strong.
Does indeed.
Very strong. I imagine there's a lot of Czechs that would pop over the border.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you know what I mean?
I guess that's another practical thing around how it would work. Obviously, you wouldn't be able to transport cannabis back into the Czech Republic, so be more of a.
Well, technically, you wouldn't.
Technically, but it probably will start to happen.
Exactly.
Especially because the borders are open. You can't just drive into Germany. You're not stopped. When we've driven, you just crawl. You don't even realize you go across the border most of the time.
Yeah, this could be a really relevant moment for just mainland Europe for that exact reason, right? Why would you not then create a recreational
not really able
market?
To stop it now.
Yeah, if you could just bring truckloads of it for it. Well, not truckloads, obviously that would probably be.
Yeah.
I'm not encouraging anybody to do that.
Well, it happened with as soon as New York announced that they were planning legalization, the whole eastern coast of the US pretty much has announced, almost all of the states around there, because what is the point? How likely are you going to be able to pursue a policy of prohibition with a larger neighbor openly?
And it's going to be more hassle than it's worth if you have to stop everyone at the state border to check if they've got cannabis.
It's such a good tactic. I've always found that we probably talked for a long time about the complexity of lobbying politicians and creating reform, particularly in areas of where there is a strong moral reaction and a great deal of stigma. But I've always felt like the best, not the best approach, the easiest approach has been politicians just thinking, oh, we may as well. It's the kind of we may as well do it that works. It's not the kind of morality of the issue that you win them over. And it's not like they suddenly go, do you know what? All these years I've been wrong about cannabis. They're just
Just
Oh,
what
we may
seems
as well
easy.
legalise it. Yeah, we may as well. That's now easier. Because you saw that in Canada as well, didn't you? It was kind of like, well, there's dispensaries everywhere. Like, the courts are full of people getting arrested for starting up dispensaries. Like, we may as well legalise it. This is stupid.
Although, annoyingly, I think that the UK probably is going to have... the Germany legalizing is less relevant in the UK than it is in other.
You still got an
Schengen.
ocean between.
Exactly. If we'd have stayed in the EU, it would have been more relevant. But there's an ocean and a political divide now, both of which mean that it doesn't like necessitate reform in the way that if you were Austria, Netherlands, Czech Republic, you might think, well, this is totally pointless. We can't have a policy of prohibition, and we may as well at least have an element of control and some tax revenues.
But we have taken back control, George. Don't ever forget that.
Brexit means Brexit.
Yeah, Brexit means Brexit, and now we have control.
And
so we've lost control. We've lost control, but we've taken control back as well. Yeah. So surely everything's...
So we have to take cannabis back too.
That's a fairly good segue into the next story, isn't it? Which is the UK's in control of 10 years of drug policy.
That's another big...
And people's passports.
Yeah.
So I always find this like that the few days when the drug strategy is released pretty interesting. So, you know, this is a 10-year strategy, which first of all is way too long.
It's way too long.
Who's making 10-year strategies?
It's too long.
Like 10 years. Like, that's just completely...
Not even Mao did that. Stick to 5.
Yeah.
It's a crazy amount of time to try and plan anything. You don't know what's going to happen like the next month at the moment, never mind 10 years. But fair enough, they're being ambitious. What I found particularly interesting about this story, and a fascinating insight into the relationship that public relations has in the world of politics, is the fact that the media were dominated by the story of passports, right? So like most papers ran the story, the government are going to take the passports off middle-class drug users, mainly cocaine users. That was like headline level news reporting. And you know, everyone covered it. Like everyone was talking about it on Twitter. Like our Twitter feeds were full of people going, passports are going to be removed. This is crazy. This is wild.
And it's not in there, is it?
It's not in. Well, it's in there. But basically, once you dig into it, there is one sentence which basically says, we later next year are going to do a white paper. And in that white paper, we're going to look at a range of measures to reduce what you might call middle-class drug use. Some of those measures may include withdrawal of passports and driving licenses, and then a load of other things that it says. So it's this tiny sentence, which isn't actually part of the strategy. This isn't like, this is our strategy. It's like, oh, by the way, we're going to write a white paper that's going to do this stuff. Now, if you think about it, once you actually dig into the strategy, one of the top lines for me is it's like £780 million extra for drug treatment, which is great. I mean, it is also money they took out, when I worked in drug treatment. So they can't really laud themselves too much about this. It's more like, oh yeah, we
putting back what you took away.
Drug deaths are at an all-time high. Like we've got major issues with regards to illicit drug use in the country. We should put that money back in. Well, yeah. And like fair play. As I put it on Twitter the other day, like all the people that have campaigned for that for years, we talked about it for years. We talked about it when we worked together at Volteface. Like it was always something we cared a lot about, was like, you shouldn't underfund treatment, look after vulnerable people. So that is a good thing. But in amongst that strategy, there are some fairly liberal approaches. There's diversion schemes. We're talking about diversion schemes in there. Let's stop just over criminalisation. Let's put people on diversion schemes. They've fascinatingly changed the name of those diversion schemes to the tough consequences scheme.
Yeah.
Even though it's softer consequences.
Which is amazing. It's a less tough scheme than being arrested and having a criminal conviction, but it's called tough consequences.
It needs to make it look like we're being tough on drugs. So tough consequences.
So really tough, less tough consequences scheme. But what happened is everyone talked about the passports. So for me, that's like really ingenious public relations. Whether, I mean, it's a separate debate whether people think it's a moral thing to do or not. But from the practical application of public relations, it's pretty smart because everyone talked about a thing that's not really part of the strategy. It was just mentioned and didn't talk about treatment or any of the kind of really positive things that are coming out of it, and quite like a liberal approach to it as well. Yeah, that just went. So that's, I mean. It's both frustrating and there's a bit of me that's like, yeah, fair play. I'm kind of, I quite like seeing good PR strategy, but at the same time, it really frustrates me because that shouldn't have been the focus. The focus should have been about them reinvesting in treatment. But I think they knew that doing so would have stressed out a lot of their base. Mm.
Yeah, and they know surely that they're not going to find a practicable way to draft legislation to take people's passports off them for what being middle class. This is going to have to be in there because that seems to be the idea. And cocaine, it's not going to work.
I mean, that it's always such a frustrating line when you sit line. Didn't mean the pun. When politicians go down this, the whole middle class cocaine thing, I just find such an you see
it's
people
just
doing it on both sides of the
scaremongering
house
as well. And they were talking about having like drug dogs patrol like middle class areas to sniff out for cocaine, which is just like from a practical point of view, are they really going to deploy drug dogs all across the UK?
Dulwich.
Greenwich. After walking around Greenwich, being like, man, there are a lot of like, what is going on?
It's not people walking their dogs; they're all just sniffer dogs.
We funny story about it. I'll tell this story. It's a slight segue. It's a slight segue, but
kind of relevant still.
We were at Drumsheds the other day at a rave, and we were queuing to go to the cloakroom. I was with Katya, my partner, and we saw a sniffer dog. And I thought sniffer dogs were absolutely useless. I was like, "There's no."
Paul was really slagging the sniffer dog off. He was like, "Oh, the sniffer dog can't smell anything."
They're a waste of time, honestly. I was bragging to Georgia and Katya, going like, "Just watch this dog. It's not going to get anyone." It lit up.
Five people back to back.
5 people straight.
And we were only in the queue for about 3 minutes.
Yeah. Why have Drumsheds got sniffer dogs?
Oh, mate. And you had to, it was funneled, so you had to walk past a sniffer dog.
Well, if any of you needed any more reasons not to go to Drumsheds,
it would probably give you a few
there's also no heating.
It's the middle of nowhere. There's no heating. It's
there you go.
Overpriced. The sound system's terrible. Everyone who works there's rude. So there you go.
And they've got really good sniffer dogs.
I've never been. Welcome back to Richard. So yeah, the drug strategy is super interesting. Interesting example of public relations and the role that it plays. One jump out bit that I thought was particularly mad was that police are now, when they get a dealer's phone, they're going to text people with that dealer's phone. They're going to find the people that the dealer was selling to, and they're going to text them. Yeah. Now, I mean, what are they going to send? Hello. Are they
going to try and like trick them into it, like lure them into like then arresting them?
Yeah, and then just tell them off.
What's the strategy around that?
Which I thought that's an interesting initiative. Like
it's also quite a waste of time, to be honest, getting a police officer to just send messages to the hundreds of contacts this dealer's been in touch with. Yeah,
that'd be like a full-time job.
Yeah.
What's your job? Yeah, so I text people.
Maybe that's where the funding's going to.
Yeah,
they've just got like a social media guy texting
these dealers. Messages out.
Like we're kind of teasing out. There's like an awareness that the tough consequences thing just doesn't work, while a complete refusal to row back from the rhetoric. They're like, well, we need to double down on the rhetoric, even though we know that it doesn't work and that it's not going to work. We know that chat works. So how do we just make it sound like we're doubling down? Well, just throw in loads of stuff we're not going to do that sounds really scary, so we can get it on the front pages, and then actually put together a fairly sensible, boring policy that doesn't really change the dial much on anything, apart from thankfully reversing the crisis and underfunding of drug treatment.
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair analysis.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, as someone who advocates and campaigns on these issues, it's kind of frustrating that they just kind of pop up for those 2 days and then they like vanish. I mean, it's annoying. It's kind of frustrating in a way that it's like suddenly people are like, oh, this drug strategy, and Boris turns up in a dappy hat, stood in front of a riot van, pretending to be a police officer. Like, that's just strange. Like, I mean, that happens and then it kind of just disappears again. It's kind of quite
that's their new way of looking tough, actually, is nobody used to dress up as police. But him and Priti Patel have got well into dressing up as police, which is the way to look tough, even if you're not being tough. Dress up like a police officer. Yeah, it works.
Got a baton.
Oh, they must be tough on crime.
Real tough. Yeah, and they've called it tough consequences. So mega tough. So that was interesting. The other thing related to that we kind of mentioned on was sniffer dogs in the Houses of Parliament. That's also fairly interesting, as cocaine was found in the toilet nearest Boris Johnson's office,
and Priti Patel's office. They always mention that.
I was saying the other day, imagine if one of those dogs got in the house during PMQs or something. Imagine all the panicked MP, like
barking, jumping on Boris.
MPs would be like, anyway. So there's a bit of there's
thousands of people work in the Houses of Parliament, so there's statistically going to be
absolutely
100.
Was a few weeks ago didn't they catch someone dealing in the Houses of Parliament with like a parliamentary pass? I feel like that was a story. Maybe a few months ago. I feel like
just say allegedly all the time, and then it's fine. Allegedly.
Then we can't get caught
perhaps,
up. But I'm pretty sure that was a story.
Allegedly.
So. Allegedly.
I'm allegedly pretty sure it was a story. So that's been going on.
Yes.
The Taliban have also been kicking around. You've
Investing
seen-
into the
there was
cannabis
a-
industry.
Brief flurry of excitement around this news when the Taliban
It's such a mad story.
tweeted out an announcement that they'd got, what was it, $450 million deal with some unspecified sea farm pharmaceutical
Australian
company. Australian. They just said it was an Australian company, called Sea Farm, and then everyone went looking for Sea Farm and found
them.
Yeah. At which point they said, "Well, we haven't done any deal with that."
Imagine writing that press release. We are not in communication with the Taliban.
Yeah.
Like we're
Like
working really
having-
hard, but we're not chatting to the Taliban.
But the Taliban obviously seem to be quite good at trolling. There was just enough like truth there for it to be entertaining, because Afghanistan does do both licit and illicit poppy cultivation, and it does have a huge history of cannabis production going back forever, and every country under the sun seems to be announcing some sort of cannabis reform. So there was just enough like potential for reality there for it to get picked up by the Times and others who hadn't really done their due diligence and thought the press release from the Taliban themselves was enough to announce this as truth. But what interestingly is what are the Taliban up to? Why are they so keen on trolling everyone into thinking that they're building a $500 million hash factory?
Because it was like a legit that, like it was actually said, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Like,
the
Taliban were like
100%
tweeting
said it.
about it and everything.
Yeah. There's a
it was in
Taliban press
Reuters,
release
like it
and
was-
tweets and stuff. Yeah.
Like, because it genuinely fascinates me, that story. 'Cause it's one of the, I've heard some people say maybe there's a little bit of truth in, maybe there was a discussion going on and someone got roped into it and they were like, yeah, press release it.
I don't know. They're also doing loads of other weird stuff though. They've been like press releasing and tweeting loads of pictures of them like paddling around in canoes, looking like, "Hey, look, I know there's been some bad press, but we're fun guys." And that seems to be what they're up to.
I know people have said this and that about us,
Yeah.
but like we do like to swim.
Yeah,
we like water sports.
We like water sport
and hash.
and hash.
Yeah. So
And they go to the gym now. I saw the gym video that they released.
oh yeah, I didn't see.
Yeah, they're trying all the equipment and stuff.
Healthy living, kind of
Yeah.
positive lifestyle.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, they seem very good at social media, which I wasn't expecting from the Taliban, to be
They've
honest.
really changed the past few years.
Yeah, they
Good
have.
PR from the UK government, good PR from the Taliban. We've got a lot to learn.
So yeah, we'll see. We'll see if that develops. We'll see if they re-emerge. But there was to be clear, there was no deal. The CEO of the company that was in question did like a big press release and then was like, we'll stay away from it. So we'll see what happens. What other stuff, Katya? What's kind of caught your eye over the past? Well, we've obviously not done all good
Over
points
the
for
past
some
7
time.
months. Lots. I mean, the Malta legalization bill is quite interesting. I think it's not really legalization. They're looking to decriminalize, I think, up to 4 plants or 7 plants per household and have kind of like a non-profit social club model. I don't really know. It's kind of been blowing up in the kind of Maltese Times and newspapers around what's actually going to happen. I think they're having the 3rd reading of the bill this week, and allegedly it will be legalized or decriminalized in the next like week or so. But I think it's been kind of a journey, and it's been very kind of up and down over the last few months. Obviously, there was a white paper consultation back in March, April time. And to be honest, Malta, the situation that's kind of developing there is quite interesting because there's not a whole load of public support for cannabis reform generally. Like, public support's pretty low. It's quite a socially conservative country. But cannabis reform and the kind of social justice angle of cannabis reform has very much come from politicians and from the government. Now that we're kind of edging closer to legalization, loads of groups are kind of speaking against it. The opposition, which used to kind of be a bit more in favor, is now going in on it and against it. Loads of NGOs are speaking out about how they're really opposed to it. They're tearing into stuff like the fact that education, like cannabis education and drug education, should be ruled out of the bill because they fear that will kind of increase use. So I think it's just a little bit of a mess, and no one really knows what the bill will turn out to look like if it does actually go through. And obviously, if there's such strong opposition to it and it does go through, what that actually looks like could be quite interesting.
I don't know where everyone's going to grow all of this ganj?
Yeah, because everyone's in quite small apartments in Malta.
Exactly. So for those of you who haven't been to Malta, it's one of the most densely populated countries in the world, if not the. And there's not much in the way of land left.
No,
Almost everybody lives in flats rather than houses. So it seems like the most disagreeable form of legalization they could have tabled, really, because there's no opportunity for business or tax revenue, yet all renters, freeholders are going to be annoyed because loads of people are going to be now growing cannabis in their house, using their electricity for it. There's going to be loads of nuisance complaints about the smell. There's going to be loads of people who wire things properly and cause a fire or
and I think you're not allowed to grow plants on balconies either. It's I think the cannabis plants can't be seen like publicly from the streets. So obviously lots of flats have balconies, but if you can't grow it on the balcony, then that just, limits space. So, it'll be interesting to see how it actually plays out in practice. I think there's also still, you're not allowed to consume cannabis publicly unless it's for medical use, because obviously medical use is legal. So it will be interesting. And obviously I think the kind of public health decriminalization models, in some ways less favorable to just having a proper industry where people can access it commercially. So it will be interesting to kind of contrast that to what Germany decides to do over the coming years, and which way I guess Europe moves down, whether it's the kind of decrim, grow your own movement, or towards more of a commercial
It seems like a headache, though, the way they've gone about it. They seem set on that iterative plan where they started licensing medical facilities and then started opening up domestic opportunities for medical patients, and now they're opening up the recreational thing, and they seem set on the path that they set out on how to go about this. But it does seem the more difficult way to go about it in a lot of ways, and you wonder whether it might, with Germany just going the whole hog, whether people might be scared off the what people think might be the slightly easier reform to get across, the home cultivation.
I think it's probably just because home cultivation and decriminalization just feels a little bit less scary, and it feels like the kind of softer approach than just going full in legalization and commercial interests around cannabis, because that just raises all those other kind of questions and uncomfortable discussions.
Just with my policy wonk hat on, though, it does seem much more challenging, doesn't it? Because it's almost certainly going to lead to increased youth access rather than lowered youth access. It's going to lead to more complaints, probably, because you're not going to have well-regulated companies that deal with their odor, that have been licensed, and etc. You're going to have people growing it all over the place, and no one's going to get any tax revenue. So how are they supposed to increase drug treatment or education? And who really stands to hugely benefit from it? Because I don't think people are widely being persecuted for growing a couple of plants at home. So there's not a huge just a group of stakeholders in favor. It seems like a difficult thing to get over the line, but
it's kind of weird that it's kind of come from politicians mainly, because you make an interesting point that a lot of I guess all reform arrives through different paths, but there's normally quite a lot of advocacy.
Obviously there is some excellent advocacy taking place in Malta, but I think just generally when you look at it from a population level, public support is pretty low.
But there's there is some great advocacy in Malta. There's a group that you know well from ECAN that do amazing. What's it? Relief?
Relief
do amazing work. Yeah, but it's interesting that the political figures have kind of really got behind it, and then not gone for a model which opens up that industry, jobs, economy is a bit more cautious.
I think there's a strong focus around social justice and obviously kind of public health, and not wanting to promote cannabis use. I think from all the articles I've written and kind of seen the progression of the discussion, they just want to kind of limit youth access, which is kind of, I guess, like you've mentioned, probably won't be achieved with the way they're going about it currently.
No.
So that's comment. What you
well, of all the systems, there are demonstrable benefits to decriminalization, but I don't think decreasing youth access is one of them that you can really say about it, because surely the best are a highly regulated or a strictly enforced prohibition. Those are clearly going to be the best to the extent to which policy can influence youth access to cannabis. It's going to be at either end of the spectrum. You're likely to get better results than the
than something in the middle.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether this will kind of just be a stepping stone around reform, and they're trying to ease into the conversation and discussion around decriminalizing, doing a step in the right direction. Then we'll see further stuff. But I guess we'll see what continues to happen, and whether the bill actually goes through. Media seems to be quite confident that it will, but there's been loads of backlash and loads of kind of arguments against it. So
one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, one to watch.
Switzerland as well have made quite good progress, haven't they, George, in the past few months?
They have. So they're cracking on with their pilot, which is a big long-term project where early next year the first legal non-medical users should have access through these pilot schemes. But I was concerned that was going to lead to Switzerland waiting for all the evidence in from this huge pilot program before they looked at reform. But there are now reforms being tabled, which are sweeping reforms to both medical and recreational, which the government are being advised not to wait for all the evidence to be back from their pilot scheme. And that's the kind of thing that's likely to get expedited by the German stance. I think a lot of the reticence to full legalization in Switzerland is around concerns with what it does to the position with their neighbours and what have you. But with Germany legalizing, it's kind of Switzerland surely would become a bit of an irrelevance.
Germany, really significant for a lot of this stuff, isn't it? That, I think, going back to that point we were making earlier, the border issue is just going to force all countries within driving distance of Germany to seriously reconsider their position. And
but I guess they've got a bit of time until they reconsider, because obviously Germany's announced it, but as you mentioned, George, it's going to take a while to kind of iron out what that model actually looks like when it's actually going to happen. So I guess
there might be a bit of lobbying from some of those neighbour countries at an EU level to be like, whoa, that's why I mentioned the tourism point, because there might at some point be a discussion of bordering countries to say you can only sell to German citizens. You know what I mean? Like, you need a very strong ID process, or someone that's staying in Germany and not leaving Germany for a certain period of time.
Yeah.
How effective that would be? I mean, Germany's quite a powerful country.
They tried to do it loads in the Netherlands and never managed to do it. I think that they would struggle around the practical implications of trying to govern that. But they legally would be able to, because the EU allows for discrimination on the basis of nationality when it comes to drugs. But I still don't think it'll happen, even though it's legally a possibility.
Yeah, fair. So Switzerland progress, Luxembourg progress, Malta progress, Germany progress. Europe's come quite far in the past 6 months.
Yeah, Portugal also discussing their reforms, a little bit earlier stage, but there's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on, and all good for us. All good for us.
All good points.
All good points. All good for us. There was one last story, which is always nice to end on something light-hearted. We've already touched on the Taliban. I'm not sure how light-hearted the Taliban are, really.
In the cannabis space, I guess it was quite a
maybe
light-hearted story.
If you dig a bit deeper, it's probably one of the least light-hearted subjects you can chat about. But there's also the mice story, the story of the mice eating half a ton of weed. Did you see about this in Argentina? I think this is fairly interesting.
That's where the word allegedly a lot, good use.
Yeah.
Some mice allegedly ate 500 kilograms of cannabis.
I mean, it could happen.
Police were supposed to be looking after.
It could happen. I've got the
we
quote.
do a little poll for our viewers. What do you think happened? Do you think mice ate the missing 500 kilograms of weed, or do you think the police who were entrusted to look after it might have taken some home?
Well, let me give you a direct quote from these guys. So, like, this was an article we found on Inverse. So The Guardian reported on Wednesday that only 5,460 of the 6,000 kilograms of cannabis that had been sitting in a warehouse for 2 years were found. And the former police commissioner, Javier Specia, and his 3 subordinates, all the main suspects, told the judge that the missing drugs had been eaten by mice. Wild mice don't usually go out of the way to eat weed, apparently, but they do obviously wreck crops and cause a lot of trouble. So yeah, I don't know. There's still quite a lot of weed in it for the mice. I mean,
were the
my
mice
suspicions
okay?
are raised.
Like, what happened to the mice?
The
No
mice
one's
started
talking
like a
about
little
that.
collective, little homegrown. Yeah, maybe siding on. Yeah, maybe there might be a cover up there, guys. I think the police might have allegedly taken some weed
Allegedly.
and are trying to cover it up.
Very bad.
Poor mice.
Yeah.
Getting all the blame.
There was another police story as well. Just to finish up, there was another police story, one that came out yesterday of a
Yes, police officer.
who'd disclosed cannabis use in the past year.
Yeah, and will be facing consequences. Yeah, I think it was last year, and it's going to be facing consequences. I mean, it's kind of goes in line with the cocaine in Parliament story, that it's kind of like one rule for them, one rule for everyone else. But yeah, practice what you preach.
Practice what you preach, guys. And if you do use cannabis and you find it have medical purposes, go to a clinic. It's become a legal cannabis patient.
Yeah. It is legal
in the
medically.
Actual willing consultants who want to write the prescriptions, which is one issue, major issue.
Yeah, it's become much more of an issue just clinically around getting doctors to feel comfortable prescribing than it is like a political issue, because the policy changes there.
But check it out. Find a clinic. And if you're having a difficult time, speak to your clinic. Any other? I think that was it for guys news wise. Anything else jump out that's been on your mind that you've been thinking about that you want to share with the world?
Can't think of anything. No.
Taliban, mice, government, Boris, happy hat. I think we're all good.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, it's
Sounds
nice to be
good.
back. It's nice to, well, obviously see you every single day, Katya. It's nice to sit on the sofa again, mate. And talk about what's been going on. We'll keep going it with our shiny studio, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning in.